Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay as we recap week 3 of the 2024 MLQ season. Just wanted to start off by apologizing for last week. We know a lot of people look forward to this show and we're sorry we won't be able to provide it, but we will be back this week and expectedly for the rest of the season. I'm Ethan Sturm. I'll be your host tonight along with Naresh Adala and Jack McGovern. We've got a couple great guests coming later today as well because we had, I would say, probably the two best series of the season so far in one weekend. So a lot to talk about there. So I'm not going to hesitate all that much. But just as a lead-in question for the two of you, I want to ask a probably way too early question and still make you have takes on it. Is this the most parity-filled MLQ season already? I will give you a couple possible other contenders. So in 2021, that's the only season we ever didn't have any undefeated regular season teams. But at championships, Austin and Boston both still did make that finals without any losses. And then Austin did sweep Boston in that finals. 2022, Austin won the championship, but did get taken to 3 games, both in the quarterfinals and the semifinals of that season. So obviously right now we had 2 undefeated teams last year regular season, not going to be undefeated, Chicago and New York. Austin has not played a game yet. So with all that said, Naresh, what do you think about the parity in MLQ this year and maybe how it compares to other years?
Yeah, so I think it is set up to be one of the most parity-filled seasons of MLQ seasons, of all the MLQ seasons we've had. But I think this isn't anything out of the ordinary for the South. I think anyone who's paid attention, the seedings for honestly the 2 through 4 for the last couple of years, honestly, has been extremely competitive in the South Division. I just think now the North has gotten significantly better. Detroit, who was often extremely young, might not have been ready for the highest levels. Now they're looking like they can compete against the Chicagos and Minneapolises. And Toronto, obviously, great showing against Cleveland. So who knows what they'll end up doing against the more quote-unquote traditional, the teams that we often talk about. But Toronto put out a very dominant effort. And again, a lot of people forget they were, I think they were the 2 seed in the North last season. So I think the thing is with this season, unlike other seasons, is the fact that at nearly every single division outside of the East, I think, has gotten better. And now with the East, we're still looking at a New York, Boston, with potentially Washington in a rebuilding year. And I think the loss of Cylind Richard definitely hampers how high Charlotte's potential is this season. But I think 2 out of the 3 divisions are set up for absolute chaos going forward.
Jack, agree, disagree?
Yeah, I think I agree with Naresh that, the South has been, really competitive for a while and the North is raising its game, whereas, the East, there's a little bit less parity, except maybe at the top than past years. What I think we're seeing is the overall level of play just being taken to another level in MLQ. So these teams are really taking a step up, and it's been exciting to watch. I mean, this New Orleans League City series that we're going to talk about, these teams are likely competing for that 4th qualification spot in the South Division. This was an impressive match to watch. This was good quad ball being played, and I think in the East Division, it's just great to see the New York-Boston rivalry, back in full force. So that was really enjoyable this weekend.
Yeah, I think a little bit to Jack's point, we kind of sometimes talk about the lost generation coming out of that COVID period. And I think you could argue maybe those 2021, 2022 seasons were parity due to maybe a dearth of talent across the league. And I think this year you could definitely argue this is more parity due to an excess of talent as more and more of these young players come in. And we're about to talk about the New Orleans League City series. Obviously, Hayden Boys popped off in that series. So, things like that I think are slowly creating more of this parity. So, let's get into the series. And we are going to start in the South, where the New Orleans Curse hosted the League City Legends in a series that was incredibly competitive end to end. New Orleans took the first game 155-100. The Legends answered 170-145 in game 2. And it came down to a golden goal situation in game 3 to decide the series, possibly, depending on results, could be the game that decided who gets to go to championships. And the Curse end up winning at 165-150. Now, this series had a lot in common with last year's series that New Orleans hosted against the Legends. It was competitive end-to-end, controversial at the end with New Orleans skimming by. So I don't want to know about the similarities. I want to know more about the differences in these teams, either good or bad, what you think has changed about these two teams over the course of a year. So Naresh, I'll start with you and I'll start with League City. What do you think is different about this League City team?
I think from what I saw this past weekend, this was a team that came out with a plan, and this was a team that looked a lot more confident in the half court, which is something that can't be really said in the last couple of years. Oftentimes, this Sam Houston, League City, those two teams were extremely reliant on the singular greatness of Hayden Boys. And now I think this past weekend, we really saw, for as great as Hayden is, we saw other people step up. And Mallory Hughes is someone that I've been a huge fan of ever since Sam Houston upset Rutgers a couple of years ago. She is an absolute star. And off this weekend with the number of defensive stops she had, she was always in the right spots. And I think other people such as Andrew Acosta, who quite possibly might be one of the fastest people in the league. And I think Billy Nellums, who started playing in February for Sam Houston, but looks like a bona fide, legitimate threat. So I think with this League City team, unlike other years, they're coming out with a plan, and the sheer fact that they're a lot deeper than just Hayden. And they're coming out with a more systemic attack, which makes them look better. And honestly, I really wasn't that impressed with New Orleans half court, which maybe it's just me because I had New Orleans so high coming into this season. I've consistently said I think they are the most strategic team, given how many players they've had in the last couple of seasons. And so now with this season, they finally have a lot more players. I was like, yeah, this is all going to come together. They're going to be strategic. They're going to be able to use all these things. And I honestly thought they got outplayed for most of the season. Most of the series. And I think the stats back it up. I think it was something like League City had 420 total goals combined, and New Orleans had around 350 or so. They thoroughly got outplayed in the quad ball game. But with New Orleans coming into the series, you knew they were going to have the dodgeball advantage, and I think that really put them over the edge when it came down to it.
Jack, what did you see from this League City team?
Yeah, I mean, again, agreed on both points. I think for League City, we saw a really well coached team in the half court. So there was more spacing. They were playing a little bit less like direct drive and dish, getting more people involved. I thought all of those were really positive developments for the Legends. On offense, on defense, they were organized, playing a 2-2 zone, and then the addition of Baltimore Nunez was huge. Nunez played 75 drives and was giving the really excellent New Orleans beaters some trouble in game 2 that the Legends pulled out. Nunez was just really hard to break down in the half court, especially, and I think that was the root of some of the Curse's difficulties on offense. I agree that this Curse team has a lot of room to grow on offense in the half court, especially. They won this game in transition moments.
Yeah, I think that's right. And these two series, I think the kind of big difference is if Naresh, as you put it, that you think League City outplayed New Orleans across the series, and I think you could maybe argue on the other side that maybe New York slightly is considered the better team and maybe outplayed Boston slightly across the series. The difference is that New Orleans was able to catch every single flag runner, and Boston was not able to catch any flag runners. And when you are the underdog, that's the leveling factor in quad ball. It always has been. It always will be. Unless you're going to somehow, fight through and just actually be better on paper for a team better than you for 30, 35 minutes, you need to be able to catch the flag runners. That's how you win series. And to New Orleans' credit, that's what they were able to do. And I do think it is worth mentioning because, Naresh, you did say, the beaters on New Orleans being better, and they were. But I think last season the gap was huge. And as Jack said, thanks to the addition of a performance like Nunez, kind of brought the gap close enough where that now a quad ball advantage. And I do think League City definitely had that. And it really is. It's, what we were just talking about with the parity. It's a team in League City that all these years has been young and raw and unorganized, but they've been putting in the time and they've been developing. Now these players are graduating college. They're starting to be on club teams. They're playing on very good college teams. And I think all of that's now starting to kind of flow into what this League City program is. On the New Orleans side, Naresh, what do you think's a little different from last year?
For sure. So I apologize. I know I really jumped the ball a bit and started talking about New Orleans earlier. Yeah, but in terms of what's different, I think sometimes when you have 12 people and those 12 people are veterans of the sport, they've been playing for a while, you don't have to teach the game as much versus for New Orleans, they have a tougher spot because a lot of these players are not playing on a USQ club team. And so with the additions of newer players or the return of some players, there's still that potential time period where you're trying to get everyone back into the fold. And I think this team is really set up going into the summer. I think they were lucky that they escaped with the series victory, but I think this is going to be that kick in the butt to be like, hey, we got to get on top of our stuff. We got to make sure that we're playing the New Orleans style of play, which is good passes, moving with purpose. A lot of times I saw the New Orleans beaters doing a lot of really good things on offense, whether it's tap beats or blowing up the play. And I saw the ball carriers just hanging out at mid pitch. It's too slow. You're not playing with your beaters at that point, and if you're not playing with your beaters, the timing for scoring is just gone. And I think that's something that they did really well last year. Their half court looked a lot more productive last year, and I think this year it was really, are we going to get the one pass for us to score? And if we don't get that one pass, then we're either overthrowing our person or we're just not going to score. And dude, the number of times I saw someone just hit the lane and just airmail a pass right above someone's head. At this level, like, we're not playing 2016 quad ball anymore, right? Like, that was perfect when it was a mark defense look. You had someone running in, and now with the addition of zones, there's going to be someone hanging out right in front of you to try to throw it over someone and then land it perfectly. It's not going to be as productive. Having said all that, they look like they have the chasers to be able to make those type of things work, though. I think it was game 1, or no, it was game 2. I'm sorry. There was a pass from, I think it was Ben Mertens, who we're going to later interview, to Carson Runnings. Absolutely phenomenal pass. Carson hit the lane before the pass even got there. Mertens hit him on the run. Carson, I think he's like at least 6'4", went up for it, absolutely unguardable, and then dunked it small hoop. That sort of high quality passing in terms of movement into the pass rather than just standing stationary. That's the sort of passing I expected from New Orleans more. And I think as we keep going, as we get these players into the fold, I think we'll start seeing that more this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe this will be one of the talking themes. Obviously, this is my first episode of MLQ Replay, so I think we'll go. It's going to be, I think, a lot about what passing looks like across the league in terms of offenses. I think we were kind of coming out of that phase we were in where there were these really big dodgeball differentials in a lot of the series, and these teams were sitting on these force to no dodgeball and drives. And the floor of beating this level is getting to a point where those are getting fewer and farther between, no matter how big the differences between the teams are. And you need something else then to break down these zones. And that thing is passing. That thing is stringing together passes. And some teams are willing to look for that, and some teams aren't willing to look for that. I think it's something we're going to be talking about as we go. But Jack, do you want? Sorry, Naresh, did you want to respond to that?
Real quick, I apologize, Jack, because Ethan, you said something that I think was extremely important, and I think it's really the way the game 3 ended, which I think might have been game of the year so far. The fact that League City was sitting on golden goal for, I think, 4 or 5 possessions, and you saw the decision making to try to run through multiple chasers instead of trying to pass around, I think is really just what they beat themselves. Right? I personally came out of this weekend thinking League City was the better overall team, but they beat themselves, and I think that's where that experience, a certain style of play, like breaking those bad habits as you start developing these passing offenses, that's what we're going to have to see with a lot of these younger teams. But especially with like Chris Dorsey, who's a veteran player, you expect better decision making from him, where he's been around for a minute, and I think running into multiple tackles, not ideal. But I think this is a learning experience because they had it in their grasp, and now they're going to want it even more, which I'm excited to see how this team progresses. Sorry, Jack.
Go ahead, Jack, and we'll get back to the end of game 3 after that.
No, you're all good. This is really interesting. I mean, I think it's about passing. It's about attacking from different angles. One player who's been really good at that in the past for New Orleans is Charlton Trammell. And I thought Trammell's usage was pretty low in this series. Like I thought they could have run more of their offense through Trammell, just because he's a player who is gonna draw dodgeballs, gonna draw defenders, and that creates the openings for people to make cuts into dangerous spaces and get the momentum going for the Curse's offense more generally. I think on the plus side for New Orleans, the return of Emily Thompson and Shelby Cascio, I think were big big aids to their ball movement and ability to withstand pressure. This was the beginning for New Orleans, and I'm excited to see what they do the rest of the season.
Jack, real quick, Ethan. I think, Jack, something that you brought up, which was I personally slightly disagree with. I think Trammell is a phenomenal player, but I disagree with the fact that he should be a ball carrier. I think the last couple of years, specifically I think the 2021 summer, Veronica Spicer showed that she could ball carry at this level, and I'm a huge fan of what Spicer can do, and I think this past series specifically, she wasn't getting the ball enough in her hands, and oftentimes we saw that very, very stagnant look from New Orleans. And I think going back into letting Spicer ball carry a bit more, and I think I'm so glad you brought up Emily Thompson, because there was a move that she made, and again, I don't want for this to sound blasphemous or anything, but her movement looked like something like I've seen Lindsay Morella play up close for years now. She looked like her movement looked absolutely phenomenal. She looked different on the field. Like, it when you see it. And so I think I'd love to see potentially New Orleans put the ball out, take the ball away from PJ Mitchell or Marcellus Lewis and put the ball into Veronica Spicer's, Emily Thompson's hand, and let the mismatch that you get with a Lewis off the wing or a Trammell off the wing. Like, these are so mismatches that I think can be exploited at a higher level if you can allow for a Cascio to get back onto the ball or a Spicer to get back onto the ball. But that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, fair enough. I think having Emily Thompson back in the league this season playing at full level is really fun to see. Jack, I did want to get your thoughts on the end of Game 3. We already got Naresh's, but we'll kind of circle back. I think a lot. I said this on the broadcast during the Boston New York series during Game 3 that I think these goal-to-go type situations really teach you a lot about teams and specifically teams' preparations, because these situations aren't really about, just kind of, outskilling or, kind of playing some kind of loosey-goosey play. They're very structured situations. You want your best play, whatever that is. And Boston, to their credit, kind of, threw the kitchen sink at New York in that last play, creating a dodgeball, were able to score. And it feels like League City maybe hasn't gotten to that level of preparation, at least this far into the season. So what did you see kind of down the stretch there?
Yeah, I mean, I think New Orleans made some really big plays on defense. I think, there was an open field tackle by Marcellus Lewis. There was a block at the hoops by PJ Mitchell that saved the game. And then, there was the unfortunate penalty on Mallory Hughes, who, like we were saying, otherwise had a great series. But there were just a couple of errors. Overall, I think you're right that the Beaters, could have been more prepared for a situation like that. Knowing that they only needed one goal. As New Orleans then pulled, one goal away, it became a bit more complicated, and ultimately, they were able to take advantage of a great transition opportunity, like they had been doing, really all series. Ultimately, some really big plays by New Orleans on defense, I think, saved this series.
Fair enough. Well, we're going to get to our first interview of the night, and we're going to bring in the head coach of the New Orleans Curse, Ben Mertens. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So obviously coming into the series, I think a lot of kind of fiery back and forth, all in good fun, I would say, between the two teams. This has been a series, as we were talking about, it's been competitive for a few years now. And even in your short coaching stint with New Orleans has, kind of had that bad blood to it. Do you guys kind of get a little extra hyped or a little, look a little harder at the series coming into it often?
I think so. Historically, this has been a very important series for both teams in terms of championship contention. I think both teams right now are trying to have that not be the case, right? I don't think League City thinks their season is over just because they lost to us. I think they're going to try to take games off of Kansas City and San Antonio and Austin, and we feel the same way. But there's always history, a lot of close games, a lot of complaining and things like that, and people talking to each other in the middle of games, which makes the sport better, right? So I think we're trying to bring that intensity to every series this summer, not just League City. And you saw that just being the first series of the summer and this being the kind of inaugural year of quad quips, it was more out in the open than maybe it's been in the past, but this has always been a hot series for sure.
Yeah, shout out Amanda Dallas for the quad quips idea and for running those surveys every week. You kind of heard us talking about how we saw a more organized League City. What was prepping for a team with kind of a new coaching staff like, and did they surprise you guys at all with their preparation coming into the series?
Yeah, I want to give a huge shout out to League City. I know in the community at large, they tend to be a little bit of a punching bag because they haven't won very many games in the last few seasons. And they have a couple of players who maybe run their mouths on social media a little more than they should. But you put the noise aside, this is a really, really good team. Hayden Boyce is a superstar. Swathi Man, amazing addition for their team. Mallory, who you shouted out, was really big for them. Chris Dorsey was really big for them. Baltimore Nunes, who you mentioned, huge back in the beater game. So the talent is even better this season. But I think the thing which you guys touched on is this was the way more composed League City, which we were expecting. We have a lot of respect for Hayden as a player, and we figured as a coach too, and with Kabina as an assistant coach as well, we figured they'd be a more organized team this season. We took this super seriously, and we really prepared for them. And I think that was why we were kind of able to escape this very narrow game against them, because we know just how talented this team is. We saw up close last year, all three of those games could have gone the other way last year, right? When we swept them, they were all flag runner range games. Thankfully, we were able to come up with all three grabs again this year, but we knew this was going to be a tough series. We prepared super extensively for Hayden, and he scored 15 goals anyways. But we did force him into at least some tough turnovers, which is what, the trade-off we were having to try to make. If we can get him to at least make some mistakes, that keeps us in the game. So they're definitely improved from last season, but we expected that, and we expected a close series, and they obviously delivered that. It was a lot of fun to be part of, and I think they are going to be a team to watch for the rest of this season and in future years for sure, because they're very, very young as well.
So, I have a question for you just generally as New Orleans coach. Obviously, New Orleans is a little bit unique in that there's no club or college teams really in the USQ world right now. So I would guess, I don't have the actual numbers, that you probably have the highest number of not active USQ players right now. And even amongst the ones that are active, they're playing for teams further away, probably not practicing a ton. So when a lot of these other teams are trying to start up their MLQ practicing within, 3-4 weeks after USQ Nationals, I assume things are a little bit different for you. So how does that work in terms of how you guys get prepared for a season, kind of ramp up into what's a very big series for you stakes-wise as your first series?
Yeah, it's a challenge down here for sure. So we had Veronica Spicer and Alex Pucciarelli were part of the Texas Heat team that made the semifinals, and they both really improved from being part of that program. And then I played for DCQC at Nationals, and Sarah Neal played for Barrier Breakers at Nationals. That was it. Nobody else played during USQ. And a lot of our players, beyond just not playing USQ, we have a couple who have never played the sport before this summer, aside from a couple pickups down here in the area. And then a lot of people who played for Curse a couple summers ago, like you mentioned, Emily Thompson and Shelby Cassio falling into that bucket. So it was a challenge, right? Last year we showed up with, I think we had 21 people on the total roster, right? Not the series roster, the total roster had 21 people, and all of them were pretty familiar with each other except me, having just moved down here. So it was a lot more of just jumping right into things. This year was a lot more building stuff back up, getting people who hadn't played in a couple of years back into rhythm, figuring out who was going to play well with who. And we were still figuring a little bit of that on the fly in League City. The lines we kind of ran were different in game 3 than in game 1 based on what was happening during the series. So that's definitely a challenge for us, being the team without a USQ program to fall back on. But it also does mean that nobody is coming in used to doing things in a USQ way that are different. In MLQ, everyone came in kind of a bit of a blank slate and was able to quickly kind of pick up what we were doing and buy into that. So there's definitely still challenges, which I think you saw in the games with trying to incorporate those players who are either new or just haven't played in a couple of years. But I think we saw the improvement between game 1 and game 3 as well, and we'll continue to see that over the course of the summer.
Yeah, Ben, picking up there, given that context, I mean, you heard our assessment of your like half court offense in this series. You know, was that an assessment that you shared? You know, how was the team, you know, feeling and, you know, kind of talking about, you know, how it performed in the half court this weekend?
Yeah, we mentioned to the team afterwards that we were happy that we won the series. I think we really gritted it out at the end of game 3, which is something that is not really possible to coach, which is nice to have, right? But in terms of just execution, we're not where we want to be yet. And that's not completely unexpected because we were trying to not just incorporate these new players, but really get away from relying on 2 or 3 players all the time that we kind of had no choice but to do when we only had 12 players. But we wanted to try to incorporate as many players as possible to give them chances and give them reps, because that's the only way they're going to be ready to contribute by championships, is if they're contributing during these regular season series. So we knew there'd be growing pains with that. We have film, which we've already, you know, started sharing with the team to work on and improve those things. But our execution was not where we wanted to be. I think a lot of our ideas that we've talked about at practice were starting to show up in the games, and then you'd have a drop pass or a pass sailed high or a mistake, or the chasers and beaters just not being on the same page. And not only that, like, hurt our half court offense, it fueled League City getting transition, because they got a ton of transition goals in that game, which is why the series was actually them in the lead in overall Quadball points. So we think we can play a lot better than we played that series. We're super thrilled that we won, and we have a ton of respect for League City as a team. It's not like, oh, you know, boy, we played bad, that's the only reason the series was close. They're really good, but we think we're really good too, and think we can get better.
Ben, I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially when you look at games 1 and 2, and I'm really glad you brought up game 3 and how you guys made some adjustments. 1, what were the adjustments? And 2, for games 1 and 2, y'all immediately went down 6-1 in game 1, and immediately in game 2 also went down 6-1, and at one point I think it was 8-1 or 8-2. What is the timeouts? What is the thought process there? And then going into game 3, what adjustment did you make? Obviously, don't give up too much strategy, or however much you want. Does not matter to me. But like, what were those changes that you really were trying to highlight to make that difference? Because game 3 really just saw y'all not fall back and try to crawl back into the series like you had to do games 1 and 2.
Yeah, I think games 1 and 2 started so poorly because of transitions by us that went wrong and then gave League City transitions. So essentially 20-point swings where we dropped a pass or overthrew a pass running down the field of transition. And then because we so overcommitted our resources, they were able to turn around and come back the other way. That really killed us at the start of game 1 and game 2. And then in game 3, we were just a little more cautious with that. We shook up who was starting a little bit in that game just to give a different look at it. And we also just preached composure in those transition situations, and it got a lot better there. And then we just shook up a little bit kind of the looks that we were throwing at them towards the end of game 3 in terms of both defensive structure, in terms of who was matching up with who and things like that, just because Hayden, especially at that point, had gotten so comfortable that anything different we can do to try to make him see a different look is hopefully going to play in our favor. And I think that did contribute to League City really struggling to put that game away, which we were also struggling to put away. And then finally we were able to get that one to go at the end there. But that was kind of the adjustments we made. Just, this isn't working, let's try something else, both in terms of who's playing with who and then defensively how we were matching up with them, just to force that, you know, they're really smart offensive players to see something different.
All right. And last question, just kind of a general one, Ben. What, as a coaching staff, are you kind of looking for as goals? You mentioned, you know, a team like League City is looking to take games off of basically everyone else in the division, but I assume you guys are kind of in the same boat. So kind of what are you hoping to do this season as a team?
Yeah, we think League City is going to win more games, which means the onus is on us to also win more games to qualify for championships, right? Beating them 2-1 is great and gives us the up on them, but it means they can catch us by not even winning a series. But if they took one game apiece off of, let's say, Kansas City and Austin, or San Antonio and Kansas City, or whomever, they would be back ahead of us. So we have to keep winning games. And even aside from League City, you know, chasing us like that, we just really like our team this year. We have high expectations for how we can do going forward. And we recognize that, weird to say about Curse, this is kind of a young team, at least in terms of quad ball experience. That core of people like myself, Charlie, Josh, PJ, who have played for a long time, are all still there. But it's not 12 players anymore. We have more than 21 players who are actually coming to practices. A lot of them are newer to the sport, especially when you compare to other MLQ teams, which makes us think there's a lot of room for growth. So we want to go into that super series in 2 weeks and be really competitive against Kansas City and Austin. We want to take games off of them and San Antonio when we play them at the end of July, and we want to be at championships, and we want to have a better run than we did last year. We did manage to beat Detroit in that first game, but then lost to Boston and to Charlotte. We'd like to do a lot better than that this year. We think we're a better team than that now that we have 21 players instead of 12. So that's what we're hoping for.
Awesome. Well, Ben, thanks so much for taking the time tonight. Best of luck with the rest of your season.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so we're going to jump over to the East Division now for our other series this week, which was between the New York Titans and the Boston Forge, hosted in Boston. And this one, game one was 155-70. Felt closer than that. I think in the end, it was really the Titans who kind of ran away with it, but it was close for much of the game. Then the Titans clinched the series, clinched the first ever series loss for Boston at home in franchise history, with a 145-100 win that basically came down to a flag runner grab and was pretty even the rest of the way. And then Boston was able to eke out a win in game three, 170-135, even going against what was the third straight flag runner catch for New York to get a win and avoid being swept on home soil. Guys, the way I want to frame the beginning of this conversation is that coming into this series, I think it's very clear that the majority of people felt that the New York Titans were the favorites for this season. And I think a lot of people probably have not changed that opinion necessarily after this series. Fast Break News has been doing weekly power rankings, and New York Titans received 8 of the 10 first place votes before last week. And so my question is basically, was this series a New York underperformance, a Boston overperformance, or a little bit of both? And Jack, I'll throw to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I still feel pretty good about New York. I would lean towards Boston overperformance. I think that for the Titans, not having John Jackson in game 3 is huge. I mean, Jackson is one of their 2 or 3 most important players. And so, was I surprised that the Titans weren't, still able to pull out the win? Yes. But, I think, I'm not as concerned about New York long term. I think, I still feel pretty good about their depth. And, seeing Josh Johnson out there for the Titans, he delivered. The scoring impact in game 1 took a while to see him. But it was immediate, and you could just feel the boost that gave to every New York player, and when you have a player like that coming into the game, the other team feels it too. I still feel pretty good about the Titans.
See, I would say that it's not game 3 that I think is necessarily the concerning one, because you did mention that John Jackson was not playing, that I don't think Lindsey Morel stepped onto that pitch for the first 15 minutes of that game. I think it's the fact that basically any other secret rotation in the history of the Boston Forge might have won that series. I think that's what's more concerning. Naresh, where are you on this in terms of performance and underperformance, or a little bit of both?
I think it's a massive bit of both. I think Boston thoroughly outperformed my expectations. Coming into this season, I was extremely high on what this Boston team could do in terms of, I think they could really give a lot of teams a run for their money, because obviously it's Boston, they're a storied program. But I didn't think the New York series was going to be close. I thought the New York talent-wise was just going to make a difference at the end of the day. And it was thoroughly flipped on its head. I saw a Boston team that everyone was clicking when they were on the field. I thought their depth usage, their personnel, their roster management was phenomenal. You had players like Ethan Dillon, whose first year rookie, step up and was one of their best players in multiple games. Ethan Dillon, a rookie, one of Harry's favorites, I know, with BU. So I think that trust for Harry to rely on such a young player and just throw him out there with the loss of Carson Olazaba for a few weeks possibly, I think that's huge and very telling for a program that has had a rocky couple seasons the last 2 years. So I think, one, they overachieved even my expectations, and I think New York fundamentally underachieved with how they performed. I was starting to take stats, and New York half court didn't look all that impressive. I think, let me slow down. One of my favorite plays from New York was almost on a broken play when when Morello was trying to save the play. John Jackson cut. It wasn't a backdoor cut, but he beat his defender off the line and essentially just started hitting the lane. That's unguardable, right? That's absolutely unguardable. And if you can put the ball in Lindsey's hands and let John Jackson play off ball, there is not that's a 1-2 combo that's unbreakable, unbeatable. And I think just how stagnant they looked. And again, I think we have this idea that if you play slow, that's almost methodical. Just because you're playing slow doesn't mean you're methodical. You're just playing slow. And I think we're seeing a lot of passes, but no progress with a lot of the half courts that we saw. And I think in the podcast that I did last week, I mentioned how like John Jackson is his own offensive system. And that's true. But I think with how this Boston team has seen Jackson play against them for years now, and I thought they acclimated well against a starting line of New York's who was playing close to like 6-7 minutes, and they weren't really extending their lead as much as I thought they could have. Second thing, as much as John Jackson is his own offensive system, they don't win this series without Josh Johnson. Josh Johnson was instant offense. Johnson was legitimately unguardable at points. And his shift in the first game, where I think it was like a 1-point game, New York had, it was a 1-point lead that New York had. And as soon as Johnson comes in, they're up by like 5 or 6. And it's like that, what was it, Marvel's Infinity War? Where was he all this time type beat? But like, I think that's where they need to figure out, because Johnson's going to score, and he doesn't need too much help to score. And I think a lot of what we saw was the Titans beaters beating out someone at hoops, forcing the pre-rotation, and because forcing the rotation, and when Boston was pre-rotating, that gap opened up for Johnson to hit those contested shots. But because of the rotations, he had those lanes. And I think relying on that consistently as your offense while Johnson can do it, he visibly looked exhausted by game 3. He missed a couple easy, as you said, bunnies. Oh, I think it might have been Teddy. My apologies. He missed a couple bunnies at hoops. And I think as you start playing these harder competition, especially at champs, you might not get those same shots. You might, and especially last year, we saw what happened with New York, Chicago, where the beaters were finally able to match what the New York beaters were doing. And I think the one good thing that New York had this weekend was the fact that they got punched in the face a lot earlier than they did last season. And that set them up. I think that's setting them up for winning this entire thing, because for me, they're still my favorites. They're still the team that I think really should stomp everyone else going forward. But it'll really have to be seen whether they can pull all of that together.
If it was a colloquialism on a Teddy Ethan broadcast, just assume it was Teddy.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I mean, the way that JJ attacks Hammer with his shots, are we officially all calling it a hammer now? Did we just accept that? Or I don't know. Regardless.
Sure.
Makes it look like, why can't everybody just do this? And it's because he times everything. Like, I'm not saying that everybody else, he just makes it look that easy. And, I do think Boston, to their credit, made some good adjustments throughout the series. I thought Zach Doyle, specifically, the way he was defending some of those hammers was really impressive. But, on the Boston side, I think, I guess I want to get at a couple of points, but I'll start on the beating side, and we can talk chasers after that. Everybody knows, what Max and Havlin and Lou should bring to a game. And I think a lot of times in recent years, it's kind of been a question of, well, yeah, the Havlin shoot minutes are going to look like this, but what are the rest of the minutes going to look like? And I think even at times in that Charlotte series, you could argue that, because there were multiple games in that Charlotte series that were like 4-4 before they stepped on the field, and then suddenly it was 10-4 or like 12-4. What we saw this weekend, I felt, was Boston was just throwing waves of beaters and having success no matter who was out there. I thought Tom DeMuth and Aaron McCready had a great shift. Kieran Collier and Leanne Dillman, who are obviously well-known names in their own right, also had very good shifts. And I think that's a lot of what helped a very young Boston Quadball game kind of hang in this series for as long as they did. Jack, what were you seeing from the beaters overall?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I thought it was a great series from Aaron McCready, Kieran Collier. Last weekend, I thought Leanne Dillman was outstanding. So, just, a very deep Boston beating performance. And, I think in every statistical category, they have the top, couple beaters from this series. So, they definitely outplayed the Titans beaters, and New York will have to go back to the drawing board and look at how their beating game can be more effective against top competition.
Yeah, I mean, going off of that, I was doing stats for game 2, which was the more competitive game amongst all 3 games. I think, again, I could be wrong, but from what I was tracking, what the shifts that Devin Lee was on the field, New York didn't score. And I don't think I've ever actually seen that happen before, because I've seen Devin Lee play for close to 8 years now, and the dude is chaotic and absolutely a menace on the field. And that leads to a lot of transitions, that leads to a lot of great things for whatever team he's on. But I think the fact that they weren't able to score on a Lee shift was not great. And I think the second thing, and this is something that I've noticed the last 2 seasons, in 2022 summer, I think one of the big talking points was the fact that Devin Lee versus a Max Havlin never happened in that series. And I think last season with Max Havlin getting hurt, we didn't see that at all. And I think this season, let me slow down. This specific series with this in this past weekend, every time I looked up and I saw Devin Lee on the field, I saw Max Havlin and Lulu Shu pair match that. And I think that's really potentially, if you haven't played all USQ season and your second week in competitive games is against a Max and Lulu pair, that's a tough ask for anyone. And I think obviously Devin's going to be better, continue to be better. He's going to be great. But I think the lack of Devin's success this year is for me attributed to a lot of who he matched up with on the field, and that allowed for the rest of the Boston Beaters to really not have to be worried about that matchup, and the fact that the beater rotations was happening 2 or 3 minutes, so they weren't overextending themselves, and they can always just be fresh when they're on the field.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that you mentioned Devin kind of coming back from not playing USQ, but also playing with a partner who hasn't been playing in Janice Liu, and I mean the numbers bear out that the two of them undoubtedly struggled out there. Average dodgeballs for Devin Lee was 1.05. Average dodgeballs for Janice Liu was 0.78. Those are very low dodgeball numbers. And it felt like that. They struggled to get dodgeball control back from these Boston beaters. It really only felt like, it was kind of the K Mullins combination. And I think at times Jason Ng, who actually had the best average dodgeball number on the team at 1.5, was the only time that dodgeballs were kind of changing. Ng was also bringing, I think Ng is one of the best pressers in the sport and did force a good amount of turnovers. Got credited for 3 stops. I know stops is kind of the big question mark stat of what exactly it entails, but it did feel that way, that the presses were strong when he was out on the field. And that kind of, gave that beating game a little bit of life. On the quad ball side for Boston, we mentioned how young this team is, and you mentioned Ethan Dillon. And I do want to give Ethan Dillon credit in terms of, not necessarily being a teacher's pet per se, in that Dillon was cut from the roster in Charlotte and earned a spot on this roster through performance and practice, and then showed up in a huge way at the series itself. But I think me and Nick have spent a lot of time in MLQ replay over the past 2 or 3 seasons being hypercritical of the offense of the Boston Forge because it has been stagnant and it's been so Ian Skura-centric, and it's had minimal passing options. It's been that, slow, methodical Norris that you were talking about that isn't actually a positive thing. And that was not the offense we saw this week. We saw a ton of young college players coming out of a ton of Boston programs where there is a lot of heavy passing offenses being built in these programs. BU worked a lot to add it to the program this year, obviously under Harry Greenhouse, the head coach, something Harvard does, something Tufts does. Tufts in its prime as well a few years ago. And this was a team moving the ball around. This was a team using breaker concepts and making the second and third passes in a possession to draw the defense out. They weren't waiting on no dodgeball. They were hitting shots. They were making the extra pass to an open cutter. And it was active, good offense. And that's really exciting because, if Boston can put together a half-court offense and have the beaters they do, nobody's going to be, putting them out of range. That's a very hard thing to deal with on both aspects. Naresh, what did you see from the Boston offense?
Yeah, I mean, Ethan, you pretty much took all of my talking points. It was great. I think there were definitely moments where passes were missed, drop catches. I think Ethan Dillon, for as great as he played, he had a lot more drop passes than I would have liked. But I think that's fixable. Physical mistakes will always be fixable. I think the mental aspect of what Boston was doing was extremely telling, and they all looked like they knew what they wanted to do and the looks that they wanted to get. I think, again, going back to a Dillon I think it was a line of Peter Lawrence, Zach Doyle, and Ethan Dillon. Yeah, and I think it was literally Doyle was up top, passed it to Lawrence, who was at the well, and then Ethan Dillon just streaking down the backside, catching it, finishing at the small hoop without a beater being able to make a play, right? And that was with a Jacob Ehrlich standing at middle hoop, ready to make a throw. And that's what good passing does. The ball will always move faster than a person, and so being able to move the ball as efficiently as they did, that was passing with progress. That is passing with purpose. That's something that we talked about with New Orleans earlier. It felt like everyone was standing around, and with New York, it felt like everyone was standing around until they got the no dodgeball look. And as you said, the parity at the beater level, especially this past weekend, Boston, New York, those beaters held their own, if not outplayed them at multiple points. So I think if you're trying to look for one specific shot for you to just drive in, it's not going to be there as often anymore. And I think with Boston, they're fun to watch right now. And I think with New York, they have all of the talent in the world to really put together an offense that's a lot more reliant on how fast and athletic they are. Because watching these players play for 2 years now, as I've been at these practices, I've seen how electric they can be, and I think it's just going to take some time to be able to see that translate on the field again.
Yeah, I'm just gonna note really quickly one concern I have about each team, and then we'll jump to our interview. I don't want to carry on too long here. On the New York side, I do have depth concerns. I know you Naresh, said you had a lot of optimism about the depth. We just didn't see a ton of it in big moments in this game. They did play a lot of minutes for the first couple lines. And then, when it was there, sometimes things weren't as clean. So I do want to see, more on the New York side about that. On the Boston side, it's the seeking game, right? They got plenty of time in those 3 games. I don't know if Leo Fried's planning on doing the series, but I'm sure there's going to be some negative grades there for amount of time without delivering a catch. And I think one of my concerns is, and I think Teddy Costa might have mentioned on the broadcast, is you kind of want a diverse group of seekers in terms of, body type, etc. And it doesn't feel like Boston necessarily has that right now. And in fairness, Adojo was not available for the series. Eli Fighter, another player who seeks, I believe, just got to Boston, so wasn't ready to play for the series yet. So there are other options the team can throw at it. They need to figure out something before champs, because they're definitely one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the league. I don't think they're one of the top 2. And I think if you're not one of the top 2, you need to catch some flag runners if you're going to beat the top 2. So that's 2 things I would say there. But with all that out of the way, let's get to our interview. And we're going to bring in the head coach of the New York Titans, Tate K. Tate, thanks so much for taking the time tonight and hanging around. Just got on mute. It's okay. We've all done it.
Of course. Howdy, y'all. Thank you.
So, you kind of heard us start the segment by talking about overperformance and underperformance, and it seemed like everyone kind of settled on a Boston overperformance. So, for you guys, as a coach who had to prepare for this team, did this team come out and surprise you at all? Were they kind of what you thought they were? Or what did you see from Boston in this series?
Yeah, I've always been up on Boston this season. I think anyone that has seen what Harry and Vinny Chico have been able to do with BU knows that he's able to coach up those younger players. So, having more college players on the team this year, mixed in with their vets, wasn't something that I was like, oh yeah, immediately it's a rebuilding year for Boston. They get Max and Lulu back healthy, bringing back a lot of strong players. So I wasn't necessarily surprised. Speaking as the head coach of New York, in my opinion, I feel like we played a little sloppy. We kind of got outplayed in all aspects of the games at one point or another. I got outcoached as well at times, and that's a testament to Harry being a veteran player, veteran coach, and for us, it's more so a situation where we just go back to the drawing board. We had two of our toughest opponents in the division historically. Both have either finished 1, 2, or 3 on the last couple years, and that's something that isn't necessarily typical for us. We're usually used to playing Boston late July, and so we got the draw middle of June, about 6 weeks sooner. And for this team in particular, it's a combination of a lot of things. We lost some key pieces while also adding returning some players that weren't with us last year, some players that are coming back from a long hiatus, and college players. And so our system, how we run it, it's a very feel it out. It's rep heavy. It's all about chemistry, and for us, it's just been a different dynamic. When you go back and watch the film of last year's series compared to this one, it'll jump right off the screen that our passing's crisper, beater decision making's better. Even from a coaching standpoint in terms of when subs are made, how far you get into your depth, it's a lot better. Granted, we're playing them again in late July, so definitely feel like we were really sloppy. We kind of played down and underperformed, in my opinion. That starts with me in terms of getting the team prepped, and making sure I go out there and perform myself, being a player coach. So certainly not the sweep we were hoping for, not the best footage or best film quality that we could put, or best quality play that we could put on film, but like you guys have kind of mentioned early in it, we got two of the hardest teams historically in the first month. Now we've got a lot of runway. We've got 2 weeks to prepare for Ottawa, almost full month before Charlotte, and then we got 3-4 weeks before MLQ champs. So a lot of time for us to kind of get back, grind it out, and kind of figure out where our pressure points are and where we need to improve, and ultimately improve chemistry, because that, I think, is one of the bigger things that jumps off the film when I go back and watch it.
For sure. Tate, it was, I think something that you said that really struck me was the fact that Titans lost a few players. And I think for me, the one person that was extremely underrated for Titans in the past couple of years was Janko Gavizdenovich. His ability to play with a John Jackson, Lindsey Morella, and just do all of the dirty work of being able to fill those spaces, make those cuts, like all of those things that he was doing really well, he's not on the roster anymore. Who do you see potentially filling those roles, and what kind of let me leave it at that first, and then we'll do a follow-up after.
Yeah, always tough to lose a player like Janko. Tough, hard-nosed, shows up on the field, does his job, and is kind of, I said it to someone, he's kind of one of those quiet people on the sideline where as soon as he subs on or he subs off, you as a teammate and as a player immediately feel better. So yeah, definitely a tough loss. But like you said, a lot of players to be excited about up and down the roster. I think we're still trying to feel out, how we want to structure our lines now within 3 max, along with, who some of these new players are that are going to step into that role. I think one player immediately that you'll see that jumps off in that behind the hoops kind of shot or cut or pump fake kind of stuff that Janko was doing last season was Ryan Leary. Giving us some early goals in the first couple games that really kind of jump started the offense. It would have been tough because Boston came in waves and kind of ran it down our throat. Definitely in game 1, 2 quick fast break goals. And so without those early conversions, it was tough. Certainly excited about these young college players, Shakti Kudaswaran, Jason Wu, who we're now finally, like Eli Fighter, getting in late. We're finally getting in Jason Wu this weekend. But we've had players of the past. I mean, we got Yada Parada back this season, Mohagog, Zach Armand. I mean, I can go up and down this roster. Avi Oliver, Molly Potter. We've got playmakers that can step up into these roles, and it's not necessarily filling like a Yanko or a Leo's shoes with. I'm not going to tell players to come in and I need you to be this person. It's more so I need you to step in and be the best player that you can be, fit within the fit within the system, and execute at a high level. Be elite at your job, and I think I don't want to keep falling back on it, but we just haven't had as much time as we typically have to kind of figure that out. And so against a team that like Boston has a lot of veterans and is very coached well, or coached very well, excuse me. That lack of time together, and when we make sloppy mistakes and when we're not crisp, it's going to really jump out. And that's kind of how it bared out this weekend. But like I've been saying, I'm very excited for the direction this team is going to go. It's all about we have two things. We have time. We have plenty of time. It's just a matter of the second thing of effort. How much effort are we going to put in? Are we going to grind this out? And I think that's something that I'm looking forward to, both with myself as a leader and as a player, but with this team. I think we're still trying to kind of find our identity a little bit.
Taking you back to a specific game situation, you guys win game one, you kind of turn it around halfway through after kind of close back and forth. And then game two, Boston kind of comes out and punches you in the mouth. 4-run right out the gate. We got that sick Ian Skur goal that we didn't even get to talk about here, but where he kind of goes around JJ in transition. You guys get forced to call a timeout. What was kind of said in that huddle? How did you guys kind of adjust and kind of get your way back into that game?
Yeah, I think for us, one thing that was kind of giving us fits, specifically me, and when I go back and watch the film, I get frustrated with myself. I can hear my old being partner Kylie McBride yelling at me to close the distance on some of these throws that I'm making. I think their trees and their beater positioning, being so sunk, and one thing that they were doing, when you're in trees, you have all hoops covered. It takes away shots, so you have to move the ball around. You've got to get people's eyes moving. You've got to force that to rotate. And I don't think we were necessarily doing that super well because, if we keep that all up in the front of trees, that allows their beaters to kind of just sit back and wait and super help on each other. And they were able to kind of turtle control, which gave us fits. And it's something that we didn't necessarily experience against Washington. So, going to that huddle, it's more so, hey, we've got to, we have to do something different. And it's a matter of, getting into, I think, from a coaching standpoint, making sure that we're using a lot more of that depth and making sure we're getting into our lines and following a game plan. I think that, as a first-time coach and also as playing and as someone that wanted to try to kind of take a step back this week compared to the Washington week to kind of focus as a player, it kind of gets all wonky with our subs and everything like that. So I think it's a matter of just cleaning that up, working with the team and kind of setting up a good structure of, what we want and kind of mixing it up. Because I think we kind of got a little bit stale. Lines, kind of fell back into what we were, still doing in terms of not moving, getting a lot of ball movement. And, it just takes time, recognition, and just chemistry. So, in the game, we're trying to mix it up, trying to get a jump start. And like you guys kind of mentioned, players like Jason Ing, JJ, giving us a nice boost on an individual level to kind of help rally the team a bit.
Ethan, you're muted.
I just don't want Tate to feel alone out here.
I appreciate it.
It was kind of an interesting mirror moment. 2021, you're part of the Austin team that kind of broke out that conservative hoop zone with the two beaters under the hoops that Boston kind of threw back at your face 3 years later and kind of had their success. Jack, I know you had a question. I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, Tate, I wanted to hear about, what you were encouraged by from this series. I mean, you came away with the win. You're in pole position in the East Division. What made you happy this weekend as head coach in this big New York-Boston rivalry?
Yeah, I think for me, it's one, we're able to gut out these close games, these flag runner games, where it could go either way. In the quaffle game or with a pull. In the last 2 seasons, that's what's kind of been our Achilles heel is gutting out these close games. Chicago last year, golden goal situation. Austin a couple years ago, I think we were within 1 or 2 by the time they scored their golden goal. So I think for me, it's a matter of we were able to finish those first 2 games, gut them out. And our seekers converted. I think that was another big thing. Shout out, to Mo Hagog and Jason Ing. That was something that when this leadership group met before the season, we really wanted to hone in on that because we felt like from a beater standpoint, we've been able to give a lot of great looks. We're just not converting on them, and it kind of killed us the last couple of years at champs. And so if we ever wanted to move past that semifinal round, we have to convert on those. That's easy 35 points to get us halfway to that plus 60. In addition, also, I think I'm just excited to get back to work with this team. I think this team is hungry. Naresh pointed out we got punched in the face, not only in the games or in the one game that we lost, but the games that we won. And I think that gives this group a lot of motivation. Specifically, those college kids, I think they're really hungry, and I think we're going to kind of rally behind it. I think the vets, we've kind of been playing with this team now the last 3 years, and even though the goal is win a championship, that's the mindset this season. We can kind of get stale on it, fall into a lull. You can look at the film. I definitely fell into a bit of a lull at times, and so I think it's feeding off some of this young energy, this new energy that we have, bringing in players like JJ. That I think this team is really going to rally behind. We didn't leave or we left Boston, with a bit of a bitter taste in our mouth. And so, I'm really hungry to get back to work this weekend with this group. We're gonna hit the ground running with our practices, not only with our play, but with a team bonding thing stuff too. We really got to come together as a team. This is a new and diverse group, and that's a real tight-knit group the last couple of years with Austin, Boston, these most recent championship winners. Those teams, they're tight, they're close off the pitch, and that's something that we need to really focus on. We really got to come together and understand each other because when you understand your teammates and you're playing for each other and you understand and I know this person just wants to win it just as much as me. It's a really motivating thing.
Awesome. Well, Tate, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. Best of luck for you in New York the rest of the season. And I'm sure we'll talk to you soon. Well, thank you everyone for watching MLQ Replay tonight. Thanks to Harry Clark for filling in at producer today, and to our guests, Ben Mertens and Tate K, for taking the time. We also want to recommend you checking out our YouTube premium content, including Tea Time with Teddy Costa and Tyler Trudeau, and our newest vlog, Shots by Sam, starring Sam Megner, which I'm sure will have some content from the Boston-New York series that we just watched. This week, we have 2 regular series as well as a super series. Ottawa and Charlotte will both travel to Washington, while Austin travels to League City for their postponed opening series. And our series of the week, the rivalry at the top of the North Division for years now, as the Minneapolis Monarchs host the Chicago Prowl. You can catch all that action right here on the MLQ Network. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and we hope you have a good night. Take care.